Right. If any of these videos I've uploaded so far is going to be controversial or perhaps feed some trolls, it's going to be this one. What I'm going to talk about today is more about my journey and explaining some stuff which I've come to believe. I'm doing it in the sense that I want to help people who might be in the same position. And in no way is this me trying to justify or apologize anything, because as I'm going to explain, I really don't think there needs to be any justification. This is part 7 of my currently untitled Mastering vlog series, and I'm going to talk about why I went from using analog processing to strictly in the box, no analog, no digital hardware, just on a computer, and why I think it's better and why I think it sounds better, which is what's going to get me attacked by particular types of engineers. But let me explain. So let me tell you a story. It's the story of my business. I started, I think it might be 14 years ago officially, although I've been doing this for a long time. I started when I was 21. Yeah, I'm 35 now. I was 21 when I started. And I started with a pair of speakers, the best computer I can afford, which was crap, really. The software that I already had, which was Cubase, and a handful of plugins. And the plugins which I went for were a couple that I tried based on some forums and also based on the Bobcat's mastering book. Now, let's be clear, the plugins 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago, were not the same as they are now. Like, there was good plugins, but there was a lot of bad ones. And there wasn't as many good ones as there are now. So over time, obviously, I wanted to experience different ways of working. I worked in my first studio, realised I couldn't really afford the rent on it, so I moved into my house briefly. And at that point, I started to get interested in analog equipment, and I started basically looking for custom stuff because it was cheaper, and you could sort of learn the process and learn. And I learned a lot about analog. I learned a lot about audio, electrical audio, and audio in general, especially filters and compression and stuff like that. So I got a couple of bits made. The first thing I got made was an SSL G series master bus compressor, which is a common one, and it's quite cheap to make. So you'll find that's a lot of people's first DIY project. The reason why it's cheap to make is it's basically working off a particular VCA chip, which was fairly easy to get hold of at the time. And then you sort of build around it, and you put it in a case, put a meter on it, simple meters. And yeah, I did start to listen better because I was using analog stuff. What it meant was that I could detach myself from the screen, and I could start to use my hands, especially when it came to setting gain reduction. I went on to get a few other things made when I was in that studio. This is when I was really early in my career. I got a, which I had for a long time, actually. I only recently got rid of it. It was the last thing I got rid of, I think. Still holds a dear place in my heart. It was a Sontec MEP 250 clone that a lot of people would have come across. Ganged stereo. Absolute beast of an EQ. You've got 2 shelves and 3 bells, and they go really wide. Works in parallel, has this really unique sound to it, especially if you engage a few bands and you do a little bit of gain on all of them. Absolutely wicked thing. So started getting more and more. I got a really nice Auburn EQ, but it wasn't suitable for stereo stuff because you couldn't match the channels, which is a big problem with analog stuff for mastering. And then I started getting better converters. I went from, what did I have? I had a benchmark DAC, and then I had some Lynx converters. And every now and again, I had some money troubles. I sold stuff, swapped stuff out, got cheaper stuff, got better stuff, got newer stuff, got some weird vintage stuff. Eventually, I moved my studio into another house, and by that point, I had a good couple of grand. I mean, I probably had 10 plus grand's worth of money spent on analog equipment. And I was getting to the point where I thought, this is it for me now. This is what I'm going to use. I'm not going to change. This is like got a certain tone to it and blah, blah, blah. All the stuff you hear people say. And then I had to move out of that house and I had nowhere to live. And I got the first inklings of an existential crisis, which I wish I'd lent into more. You know what it's like. You go through your 20s, things change. I ended up having to buy a flat. Basically, the only way that I could afford to keep going with the lifestyle that I had as in being a mastering engineer, I'm not really earning that much money at this point, was to basically take a risk on buying an incredibly cheap flat. Basically just a roof over my head. And then moving the studio somewhere else because I was living on my own. And I basically, this is when the housing market was very, very different to how it is now. I put like a couple of grand, literally, into a deposit. And I got the biggest mortgage I could afford. And then I started hiring out what was actually the live room of a studio in Nottingham that my friend and colleague Pete Fletcher owned at that point. Now, what I actually had to do at that point was really think about what I needed. So I did get rid of a few bits that were kind of superfluous. And I ended up having to have a sort of mastering setup that wasn't really in a proper mastering room, and I had to sort of move it around and stuff. So, you know, when stuff starts to break and starts to get in your way, you start to lose your romantic feelings for it, as these things go. A couple of years in, I started sharing my studio with a chap called Dallas Simpson. He's a mastering engineer who'd been active since the early 90s and taught me a lot of stuff about especially transfer, restoration, endless stuff that me and Dallas conversed over that's been incredibly useful for me. And he had his own setup, and he was, you know, further on in his career, he was about to retire, and at that point he was working all in the box. Plus this TC Electronic M5000, which I'm very fond of, which I might talk about in another video. It's a different point. But again, it gets you to question your gear use, and then it's so weird how we get so boxed into our own way of working. We don't try the stuff. I was sitting in a studio for about a year with some Prism A to D converters and a TC Electronic M5000 with the MD2 mastering software in. And I didn't even bother to ask if I could plug them in, just simply because I was like, no, belligerent, I paid all this money for this stuff, this is what I'm using. And then, you know, I had financial troubles again. And it was like, okay, I'm going to get rid of some more stuff. And then I started making more money again, and I bought a load more new stuff. And I started getting really into vintage digital stuff. Got myself 3 younger DO2s, sold 2 of them, kept one of them. And by this point, I had a massive console. I had all this stuff, loads of it, all this mad routing. I had an API 2500, I had this Syntefx weird digital thing, I had an Avalon 747, if they're something like that. And I thought, I've made it, you know, I've got all the mastering stuff now. And then that studio changed hands, the whole thing sort of fell crashing to the ground. And I was at the point again where I was moving house, actually buying the house which I'm in now, with my then-to-be wife. And when I took all the gear out of the racks and I had to replug it all back in, I thought, what the hell am I doing? Almost all the heavy lifting of what I'm processing was already in the box. I had thousands and thousands, thousands of pounds worth of gear, which I was running flat. The API 2500, I was using the transformers and nothing else most of the time. It's an incredible compressor. I love API 2500, sorry. But why the hell did I spend so much money transporting it, insuring it when I wasn't really using it? So I thought, you know what? Let's keep the stuff that I have an emotional connection to, and I did. I kept a few things, and I actually bought some more things because I just saw really good deals. They got to the point where I hadn't plugged anything in for months, and my masters were sounding better. I was working so quickly. I was able to be so flexible. I was on the phone to people while doing adjustments. I was doing adjustments within complicated parts of the chain that I couldn't do. I didn't have to wait to print stuff in real time, which gave me more time to QC and critical listen. And I started being so busy that I wasn't posting pictures of my gear on Instagram, and I wasn't having to show off about stuff. And I thought, hang on, no one cares. I think it sounds better. I work faster. I'm able to provide a better service, which is the most important thing. And nobody cares. And I started talking to other people. I was like, are you using all the analog stuff still? And people are like, yeah, I use it a bit. But then the same people were recommending, $20 plugins, which were completely changing their workflow. Made my master sound 10% better. And this mastering hardware was 7 or 8 grand, to run it through. And I had this final epiphany where I was like, no, I'm gonna check it. I'm gonna do it. And I was like, right, I'm gonna go listen to my digital converters that I had. I've owned so many digital to analog converters. It's unreal the amount that I've owned, analog, digital, and digital converters. And I've heard a lot, and they do sound different, and they all sound different to each other, and it affects the sound of your chain a lot when you're running it hot and you're running loads of stuff through it. And I was listening to all my converter combinations, and I was like, they all sound worse than the source, the digital source. And I kept having to calibrate them right and left. I mean, I say they all sounded worse. They all sounded different, and that difference was not always what you wanted, and a lot of the time it did sound worse. And I had some wicked sounding stuff. Prism AD1 Dream, now that is a cool sounding converter on some stuff. But why have that fixed into your chain when you can kind of get that sound using plugins? I mean, 99% of it, and it doesn't matter if it sounds 1% different, because it's not better or worse, it's just different. And I started doing everything in the box, and then I sort of came out to the world and said, I'm working all in the box. And everyone was like, cool, here's more work. So this was a longer video, but it's a story that I wanted to share because it's true and it's real life and it's my story. And I genuinely believe that mastering sounds better if you work completely in the box. I think analog stuff is wicked. I love it. I want to hear about other people's stuff. I like watching videos on it. I love to play with it. I love to look at the design. I like the history of it. I mean, I really like digital hardware, which is one stage more bonkers, really, because you've got sample rate restraints and stuff. But I love it. Doesn't mean I have to use it, though. And that is the point. I'm providing a service. This isn't a professional hobby. This is my job. I earn median UK average wage doing this stuff. I work completely in the box. And sometimes people ask me, what do I need to get? And I just say, please, if you've got a budget, do not spend it on analog hardware. Spend it on the listening. Because the listening stuff, room acoustics especially, speakers, will make the difference between an average to not very good sounding record, a brilliant record. The rest of it will sound different, but it's not going to sound better. And you're going to work slower, and you're going to be more painted in. Now, I have no problem with anybody that works in a hybrid or an analog setup. There are mastering engineers that I think are better than me who work that way. But for me, I genuinely believe this is the way forward. And yeah, I sold loads of gear and I made money off it, and I put it all back into the studio on way more important stuff. Room acoustics. I bought amazing new digital converters for listening. I bought loads of really, really good software stuff that was a little bit pricier that I was like, I'm going to need this at some point. Upgraded all my software. Bought some really good uh, professional services, web design and stuff like that. And my income, my work rate, everything always grows exponentially. And I do post pictures on Instagram, but I post pictures of plugins, and people are interested because it's just stuff, isn't it? The work is the work, and the result is you working, and it's your brain, it's your listening skills, and it's your experience. The gear, you could give me anything, really. I wouldn't flinch at mastering an album for a very, very top pop artist using the stock plugins in Cubase, Pro Tools, Reaper, Logic, whatever. Honestly, I do believe that. But yeah, that's my rant. So it's a bit of a long one, bit of a story, but I think there are people that might find this liberating in the same way that I did. I'm not trying to sell a way of working or a lifestyle. I've got no stock in any of this stuff or any kickbacks. I just genuinely think you will make better sounding masters if you invest your money in the listening side of things. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bit of a long one. We'll go on to a light-hearted one next. Cheers. Goodbye.